Since times immemorial, architecture has been regarded with reverence, and architects have been well respected and admired because of their ability to think and visualize spaces in a way that other people normally cannot. With such worldly views about the architect, he has arguably always had an upper hand. With the passage of time, however, the notion of the architect in people's minds has changed. Although this doesn't imply that the architect is no longer significant, it definitely means that it is time his role evolves from being a mere designer of a project to being a facilitator or an enabler. In every temporary architectural project, there are certain enabling moments during which the governing and the governed share an equal footing in space, time, and value. They facilitate the bridging of the gap between the designer and the community. They determine the success or failure of the strategy, and if addressed in the right manner, can create a powerful impact that ensures a lasting legacy. It has rightfully been stated that the value of a person is truly realized only once he is gone. So perhaps, in order to understand the importance of the role of the architect, it would become necessary to imagine a first-hand account in a fictional world without one. 14th February 2020. Most of you probably do not even blink an eyelid when you hear this date, but for me, Esther van de Wiel, designer and planner, it was the day that changed everything. But before I get into the series of events that unfolded after that, it is important for you to know what happened half a year before that day. Havenstetter, the housing corporation I used to work for, had decided to let me go because of the protests I had made against the decision to demolish an entire neighborhood adjacent to New Year, which is a community garden I had designed almost 10 years earlier in Agniesebuurt, Rotterdam. Unfortunately for me, I soon found myself jobless. My protests had also fallen on deaf ears, and very soon the tenants had been evicted and homes were demolished. Those people who could afford to pay higher rents moved on to other neighborhoods, but those who were jobless due to collapse in economy seeded shelter in shanties and tents on the New Year site, which although sounded very strange, also made sense in a way, as I patiently explained to a reporter who asked me about it. Imagine if you had never been homeless before and you had just lost your job and your home. What would you do? Where would you go? You would downsize, move into cheaper accommodations, and if that did not work, you'd move in with friends or relatives, a cheap motel, and then, where would you go before winding up at a shelter door? You would prefer to stay in the park with your family instead. I had never imagined that I would actually end up living in a tent camp. This brings me back to 14th February 2020. Our tent community woke up to quite angry newspaper headlines about the embezzlement scam in the Havenstetter Housing Corporation. Just when we thought the day couldn't get any worse, we were paid a surprise visit by the Minister of Housing himself, who expressed sincere apologies for our situation, but explained that there was a vast difference between the government's authority to provide services and their obligation to do so. Rotterdam wasn't set up to deal with tent camps, and there was a lot of pressure to take down ours. I was very angry after the minister left. In my head, I blamed the housing corporations for all our troubles, and suddenly I couldn't figure out their significance. Why were they in existence at all? It made no sense to me. I traced back to the roots of the first housing corporation, which was a humanitarian initiative on the part of some wealthy nobles, and now it was nothing but a get-rich-quick scheme. I also found an old drawing I had made about New Year years ago and about the 4 phases of development. It seemed quite ironic in a way that the unenvisioned Phase 5 would be about our tent camp. It seemed that I wasn't the only one who was frustrated, as most people in the community echoed my sentiments. People started randomly throwing around ideas, and one of those was even about building our housing on our own. The need of the hour was in trying to achieve housing that is easy to build, self-sustaining, low-cost and resourceful. We had the needed manpower and most of the required tools from the workshop, but no architect and also no expertise. Not only would we build a new housing, but we would also establish a new housing system, running on our own terms and conditions. We were all equals under the new system, and the elected body would be administrative and not governing. Any decision regarding the community would only be taken if everyone agreed to it. There needed to be a space where the community could gather, discuss, vote and decide, and we all agreed that this would be the very first space we would build. If we built the housing as a temporary shelter, the government would probably not be able to find a good enough excuse to turn down this proposal. Over the next few days, I along with a few other people began to research on affordable housing, possible suitable construction materials, etc., and I came across Walter Siegel's self-built housing. And some of the residents also told me about a housing project in Culemborg, a small town in the Netherlands, which used straw bale. We decided to have a hybrid structure with the construction techniques used in both these instances. We all pooled in our money and voted 2 of the residents to act as treasurers, contacted some farmers to supply a straw bale at a reasonable price, but when they heard of our story, they told us that they would also be willing to supply some fallen trees from their farm free of charge other than transportation cost. With our straw bales neatly stacked and the wood arriving, it was time to start the difficult part, design. But without an architect involved, it was quite difficult to visualize and plan on how to arrange the blocks. The funny thing about inspiration is that it sometimes sneaks up on you when you're unaware. In our case, it was some of our children playing with Lego blocks. It was easy to dismantle and rearrange Lego blocks to form a basic idea of how the actual blocks could be arranged, and we came up with a rough layout of the scheme. We were worried that bad weather might damage all our straw bales and decided to start building right away without wasting any more time. We would first build a community space that would store all our straw bales and the rest of the housing afterwards. I remembered seeing some tree trunks used as structural members in the Kunstwerk, and we decided that we would use these in place of regular shaped columns and worked around them. Salvaging materials from the demolished buildings led to a surprising discovery of materials, especially intact doors and windows. Although we could not hope to achieve similarity in external appearance as they were of different patterns, perhaps there was something unique about that fact, as we would realize later on. In a strange way, we kind of identified with these abandoned materials. They were unwanted, homeless, and neglected, just like we were. While it might be easy to conform them to the norms of the society and change their identity just so that they would fit in, one should not forget that they probably work best the way they are. A few things, a few values you learn in life only through experience that no book in the world can teach you. Or in my case, only working on this architectural project taught me, which I want to share with you. Sometimes the most creative solutions arise out of having very limited options. Curiosity sometimes comes disguised as generosity in the forms of neighbors wanting to help out, like donating old plastic bottles. Friendships, often taken for granted, should be held in the highest regard. Our old friends who owned the garage neighboring the New Year workshop wanted to help us out in some way, and they gave us 2 giant-sized garage doors. Although we didn't want to become close to the outside world, we put those gates up anyway because we still craved that sense of security and the knowledge that our children would at least be safe within. We became Behuizing17. This also worked out quite well for the students who used to earlier enter the vocational school through what can only be described as a hole in the wall, new ties. They would now enter the school from within our community. They also used the greenhouse, and very soon we had established a good rapport with the people from the school, and they would often help us in cooking our meals. Sharing. We established the old tool hall here, and anyone could use these tools, from not just the community, but also from the neighborhood. Faith, that these tools would be returned back when not needed. Besides, how low could anyone stoop to steal from the homeless? Risk. It usually has a very modest beginning. We decided to extend the platform out onto the street from one of the rooms in the main facade, which had folding doors and could be completely opened out to form our Sunday market where we would sell or barter our own grown fruits and vegetables. Exchange. The puppeteer shop nearby wanted to host some shows, and we agreed to let them use our market space when we did not need it. In return, they wanted to organize some workshops and shows for us. Exchange of material. One man's loss is another man's gain. We had a room dedicated only to store old junk. People from the neighborhood could bring the stuff they did not need and exchange it for anything in the room. However, the entrance was deliberately located within the community since we wanted to encourage not only the exchange but also the communication. Invention. Surprising objects like an empty cylinder had also been left in the room. Someone accidentally hit it with a monkey wrench and there was a lot of sound. Soon, this became a much-needed communication system for the people located within the community in times of emergency or summoning. We even had shared bicycles for the people within the community, where the person using one could have it in return for an equal amount of time of needed set of skill. All these things might seem small and insignificant at a glance. However, they all come together in the bigger scheme of things. These are the true enabling moments. What starts at an individual level soon extends to the community and then to the entire neighborhood. It would be unwise to dismiss the impact of these enabling moments as they empower every agent involved. Neighborhood is not just a bunch of houses lying side by side in the same place. It is a community of people that care about each other like a family, and when you are in a family, you protect each other and want to see each other happy. More often than not, it is the strongest motivation to take action. All the while that the community was growing, we were constantly aware of the absence of an architect, wondering what could have happened differently, what could have been built better. But it soon struck me that what we had done with Behuizing17 was not any different from what any architect would have probably done. In fact, we had gone a step ahead. Where would you find an architect taking into consideration throughout the duration of a project the opinion of 100 people, involving them in a fairly complex process with a completely transparent framework? Working on the project often made me wonder, are we unnecessarily complicating the system? Our lives would probably be simpler if the unnecessary players are removed and there is direct communication between the user and the provider. But this is not a one-step process, and both sides need to extend the hand and meet halfway. To the people who had once written us off and pitied us, I say, some neighbors share a fence, but here at Behuizing17, we get to share our lives. How did we get so lucky?